Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So this morning we are coming straight out of our at-home retreat, and I'm in Zendo. Hoshin and I are here in the Zendo this morning. So I was saying to him just a minute ago, how nice to chant and hear another human voice. I haven't heard another human voice when I'm chanting for quite some time. All right. So that's what's happening here. Slightly different setup than usual, but it's nice to be back in the Zendo. So today we continue looking at 108 Gates of Dharma Illumination. For folks who may be here coming straight out of the retreat and not familiar with this text or what we're doing, this 108 Gates is a text which was included in the 12 fascicle version of Dogen's Shobogenzo. He didn't write it, but it was included in that version of the Shobogenzo. It's actually a piece of a much larger text called The Collected Past Deeds of the Buddha. And it's a series, part of it is a series of these 108 statements, what I call 108 gate statements. And so I've been, for the last few years, moving through them one at a time. So today we take up gate 59, which is the faculty of effort, right? So the gate statement for this week says, the faculty of effort is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we thoroughly attain many kinds of wisdom. So you'll recall we're in the middle of a section of this 108 gates, which is describing the 37 constituents of Bodhi, or the 37 factors of awakening. So we've looked at, in past talks now, we've looked at the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We've looked at the 4 exertions, or the 4 restrictions. We've looked at the 4 bases of spiritual power. And now we've moved into a section on the 5 faculties that lead to liberation. So this is 2. Today is 2 out of these 5. So we started these 5 with faith or belief, and we've seen how they move through and build on each other until they ultimately lead to wisdom. So in the beginning, we take things on trust. We have some faith in what we're doing is worthwhile and meaningful. And by the end of this chain, we see what Buddha saw, or we see in the way that Buddha saw, and we understand for ourselves, and we have this kind of wisdom. So last time we looked at belief. This time we're looking at effort or energy or zeal or vigorous exertion, something like that, which seems kind of strange, doesn't it? When the core activity for us is to sit and look at a wall. I mean, some of us have been sitting and looking at a wall 14 periods a day for the last 2 or 3 days. So, it seems like effort or exertion it would be counterproductive to that, right? But faith is what makes our effort possible. So we're starting to see how these 5 things are kind of linked together. So as I mentioned last time, none of these 5 by itself is new territory for us. We've talked about all of these things here before, but what's becoming important in this section is how these things fit together, right? So faith is what enables our effort, and now we're into the sort of the effort stage, if you will. So energy or effort is what sustains our practice, so that we can work with the hindrances, the pitfalls that we encounter. When we see delusion, when we get stuck, when we feel trapped, it's the effort or the zeal that allows us to stay on the path and to develop some maturity over time in our practice. So we know awakening is already here. We're not going to acquire something which doesn't already exist, or that we are not already in the middle of. But there's a lot about our practice that ripens or deepens over time. And we become more mature in the practice. There's something about the way we practice, or our outlook, or our approach, which matures over time. So that doesn't happen overnight. Of course, this is a lifelong practice. If we got it once, that would be nice. If we sat down on the cushion and somehow bang, that was it, that would be great. But of course we know this is a lifelong transformative practice. And so to have some effort over time is what's going to sustain us in that. So it's just common sense that if we want to engage in something, nothing's going to happen unless we put some energy into that, unless we make some effort toward that. Nagarjuna says that laziness in practice is like poisoned food. I think this is really helpful. Laziness is like poisoned food because it looks and smells great at first, but ultimately it will kill you. So it might be that, kind of a half-hearted approach to our practice feels nice, but ultimately doesn't liberate us from suffering. Ultimately, it kills you. So, you know, it may seem easier, or it may seem more fun or something to kind of go at our practice as a hobby, or to kind of pick and choose and do it when we feel like it. And well, today I feel like doing Zen and tomorrow, you know, I don't. Or, you know, we can be influenced by the distractions around us. So it can feel, you know, more pleasant somehow, maybe, to go at this in a less than 100% way. But that's really not going to allow us to liberate ourselves from suffering, is it? Right? It takes some sustained effort. So there's this theme in the tradition that Buddhas or teachers or deities or something can't practice for us. We have to make our own effort. So it's not a case where Buddha's going to tell us something and then, oh, that's it, we've got it. Right? You know, we can be pointed toward seeing the way Buddha saw, but we've got to put in the time. You know, we've got to make the effort for ourselves. So even if all of the causes and conditions are there, even if awakening, you know, we're right in the middle of awakening already, unless we're diligent, unless we hear those teachings, take them in, and then put them into practice, liberation from suffering is not going to happen. So in a way, effort or exertion is part of all 37, you know, factors of Bodhi. There's pretty much not one of these that doesn't have some effort attached to it, right? If something's going to happen. You know, we can talk about effort kind of separately from the other factors or for any other part of our practice, but there's effort in mindfulness, there's effort in concentration, there's effort in developing spiritual powers, there's effort in, you know, all of those things. So there's no point where this doesn't apply. So what we're applying effort toward is the 4 exertions or the 4 restrictions. And these are the things that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So cultivating wholesomeness, you know, once wholesomeness is there, maintaining it, keeping unwholesomeness from arising, and once unwholesomeness arises, if it does, to somehow let go of that or dissolve that, or right. So it's an easy sort of set of activities, right? We're going to try to make sure wholesomeness is here and hangs around, and we're going to try to make sure that unwholesomeness doesn't show up, or if it does, we're going to move it on. So that is what we're talking about when we're talking about effort. It's the same as right effort in the Eightfold Path. You know, just traditionally, if we're talking about effort, that's what we're talking about making effort toward. Now, today I'm going to expand a little bit, but ultimately that's kind of the core of this thing, right? So as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the 4 bases of mystical power, even if we make progress, quote unquote, progress in our practice, you know, we can't stop making effort or we'll backslide. You know, our habituated thinking kicks back in. You know, we forget about practice, we forget about the Dharma, we go back to some old habits that we, you know, wish we had kind of said goodbye to. We lose whatever wholesomeness we may have cultivated. No more wholesomeness is arising out of that, and unwholesomeness starts arising again, and it gets stuck and it doesn't leave. So, you know, we can begin to make some effort toward those 4 exertions, but if we don't have some staying power, things kind of revert to the way they were before. So a couple of aspects of skillfulness involved in making effort. We have to know what skillfulness to encourage and maintain and what unskillfulness to discourage or abandon. So what about what we're doing in our lives, the way we see things, you know, what in our experience is wholesome and what is not? We need to be able to distinguish between the two, right? And so we need to know what is it we're actually cultivating and what is it we're trying to abandon. You know, it's one thing to simply say, well, I'm going to encourage wholesomeness, but we need to know what that is. We need to be able to distinguish when we're doing that and when we're not. You know, but we also have to be skillful in how we do that. So we need to be skillful in encouraging skillfulness, if you will. You know, if our means of cultivating skillfulness is itself unskillful, then we've got a problem, right? You know, for instance, you know, treating hatred with hatred is not a good plan. So we have to be skillful even in how we cultivate skillfulness and wholesomeness. So to skillfully cultivate skillfulness, we need to really understand cause and effect. And here we are again at one of the main teachings of our tradition. You know, we hear frequently about cause and effect. If we do something unwholesome, for the sake of helping something wholesome to arise, that could be dangerous. Maybe it isn't, but maybe it is, right? We have to look carefully at what we're doing. So we have to see clearly what we're about. What kind of effort are we making? Are we doing something which helps? And how are we getting there? So energy alone doesn't work so well. Energy alone is not necessarily the only thing we need to pay attention to. It needs the support of the other elements of the Eightfold Path. It needs the support of all the other 37 elements of Bodhi, including wisdom, which is the second half of this gate statement, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So again, we can't really isolate effort. It's not like we just make effort any old which way. You know, if I'm sweating hard enough, somehow, you know, I'm doing good practicing. Well, you know, but what is that energy going toward? Where is it coming from? What am I using it for? So we can start to see the connection between faith, belief, you know, the things we talked about last time, and effort. Because we remember last week's statement said that with belief, we don't blindly follow the words of others. So kind of like with faith, with belief, we know what direction that energy is going. So Dogen says, with humility, we should not slacken and regress. Such not slackening nor regressing involves making diligent effort. To be diligent means not seeking fame and profit and not having attachments to sounds and colors. Therefore, we should not look at the words and phrases of Confucius or Lao Tzu, and we should not look at the Surangama or complete enlightenment scriptures. We should exclusively study the expressions coming from the activities of Buddhas and ancestors from the time of the 7 world-honored Buddhas to the present. If we are not concerned with the activities of the Buddha ancestors and vainly make our efforts in the evil path of fame and profit, how could this be the study of the way? So he's pointing us in quite a specific direction here. Now, we could spend a lot of time talking about why was he not telling us to listen to Confucius and Lao Tzu. There's a whole thing about that, right? But I mean, for our purposes, what he's saying is stick with the practice, you know, stick with the path. Don't get blinded by what other people are doing or saying. You know, make your effort in the direction that your teachers and Buddhas and ancestors are telling you to go. You know, so faith is what keeps us also from looking in the wrong place for ways to sustain our effort. So not only, you know, is it giving us the direction we ought to go, and once we've started down that path, once we've started in that direction, effort is what kind of tells us where to look about how to keep going. So if we're looking for recognition for our exertion, we might not get it, right? I mean, is that really the reason that we're practicing? Is that how we're sustaining our effort? Is that we're getting recognition somehow? Or maybe we're looking for a personal reward out of our practice, some special experience, some mystical power. We talked about mystical powers a few weeks ago, right? I mean, is that what we're looking for? And is that what keeps us on the cushion? We kind of need to look at our motivation, right? We need to look at what we believe about our practice. So, you know, we're not alone in this. That's a pretty human thing, right? We all know we came to the cushion for the first time. We came in the door of a Dharma center for the first time because we were looking for something. If we weren't looking for something, we would never have done it, right? We were looking for, how do I work with my suffering? How do I deal with my bad habits? How do I make my relationships better? How do I become somebody that, you know, I like better? Right? We all came in with lots of, you know, reasons that we were going to make effort in practice. So that's very human. And in fact, Uchiyama Roshi struggled with this too. It's not just us. So he says, I had a very hard time when I stayed at a temple in Nagano for a year in 1947 to 1948. Although I practiced wholeheartedly, no one recognized my efforts. Rather, I was used like a servant by an old woman at the temple. I felt miserable. I always felt that I was throwing stones into a bottomless ravine. I didn't have even the slightest response from others about my activities. Empty spaces like this. No matter how hard we practice, there is no response, and yet we just keep practicing. This is the point, we have to practice. I just have such compassion for him. Practicing there in his temple, you know, nobody's giving him any candy. He's practicing and wondering, why am I doing that? If you've ever been in a training temple, let me tell you, there are days you feel like that, right? It's like you are everybody's servant, and what am I in this for? So, you know, my heart goes out to him, you know, in his temple. So, you know, we need to look at our motivation. Where is our energy going in, and why? And are we looking for some reward? We also need some discernment about how much effort we actually need to make. You know, sometimes we see something less than ideal arising for us, and all we really need to do is to pay attention to it and to watch it, and it lets go of its grip on us, or it dissolves a little bit. As soon as we pay attention to it, it's like, okay, I know what's going on, and it kind of goes away, and it doesn't require a whole lot of effort or attention. But sometimes it takes a lot of effort for some kinds of unwholesomeness, you know, some unskillful thing to really get dismantled. It's held pretty deeply. We've been carrying it around for a long time. It's based on a really deep delusion about how the universe actually works. You know, so it's not always the same amount of effort. It really depends on what we're looking at, and that requires some discernment. You know, it requires some wisdom. You know, we need to not exhaust ourselves, but we also need to not give up too soon or think somehow we've reached the end of the practice. Well, I've done this for a couple of years, you know, that's good enough. Or, well, gee, you know, I've sat a sesshin, therefore I now see it all. You know, we can't give up too early, but we also can't injure ourselves, right? Or injure relationships, or neglect other things, you know, in the service of something we'd call out as a special, put a boundary around it and say that's practice, right? So, you know, energy, the amount of energy, in addition to the direction of energy, is important. But, you know, even, of course, before we do any of that, we need to understand delusion. We need to see our own tendency toward the three poisons and the suffering that comes from the three poisons. So, you know, we need to like start at the beginning. There's a passage in Pali Canon where Shariputra and Moggallana are talking about effort. And the upshot is that unless we see how we're influenced by our craving and aversion and, you know, all of that to engage in unwholesome actions, we never arouse the energy and the determination to practice. So if we don't really see clearly the Four Noble Truths, you know, there is suffering and how suffering arises, we just sort of never, you know, get up the gumption to get on the cushion or to do the practice. So even before we start expending the energy, you know, in a really directional, intentional, wholehearted way, we need to understand how delusion arises, how suffering arises. You know, if we really are somehow without any delusion and we really are without any suffering, we still need to make some efforts to keep those things from arising. So even if somehow in some perfect world we got rid of all the delusion and we didn't have any suffering, that doesn't mean we don't need to make effort, doesn't mean we're done, right? Because all of these unwholesome things can creep back in. So we still have to make effort, you know. Buddha kept practicing. Even after he woke up under the tree, you know, Buddha kept practicing. So there's no escaping this need for energy or for effort. You know, there seem to be, I think, kind of two images of practice, particularly practicing something that looks like meditation, which we know Zazen is not, but it looks like meditation. So one is that Zen practice is really intensive and very difficult, and it's all about effort, and if you're not working hard enough on your cushion, someone's going to come up behind you and whack you with a stick. And, you know, it's scary and intimidating, and oh, you're one of those Zen people, because, you know, people have this image, right, of how difficult Zen practice really is. So that's kind of one extreme, and the other is that Zen is all about peace and calm and quiet and sitting up on the mountaintop in the morning with the birds singing and kind of accepting whatever's going on and really not making any effort, and life is good and everything's perfect. So we've got these like two things. Maybe you've encountered this when you tell people, if you tell people that you practice, half of your friends go, oh, how lovely, you're taking a spa day, oh, you're going to sesshin, oh, that's so nice. And the other half are going, oh my gosh, are you a samurai? It's like, do you know what this is about? So there's these two really kind of interestingly inconsistent images. So when it comes to energy, it's like, well, which of these camps do we fall into? So how do we make that distinction? Then there's, of course, there's Dogen's famous question, if awakening is already here, then why do we need to practice? You know, if we're already in the midst of awakening, then what's the point of putting in all of this effort and putting in all of this zeal, you know, and this vigorous exertion, because, you know, awakening is not something we're going to acquire. So, you know, we're not creating something with our practice, we're not acquiring something with our practice. Why do we need to go to all this work, you know, for something that's already here? And of course, the answer he comes to is, well, you know, we don't yet see the way Buddha sees. Awakening is here, but we don't live there yet. we can't manifest that completely all the time. So we can't always act skillfully based on and having a really clear picture of reality and how this universe works. We still get hijacked by our delusions and our cravings and our aversions and all that stuff. So we need to keep practicing, dropping off body and mind, returning to original self or emptiness. That takes some effort, right? It takes some energy. So Dogen's always telling us not to waste time. I think he must have looked around at his monks, and he must have been like after all, and don't waste time. Don't spend efforts in vain. Always hearing about, don't spend your days and nights in vain. He tells us to energetically extinguish the flames on our heads. We should practice as though our head was on fire, and we should practice energetically to, extinguish all of those flames, to courageously, diligently go forward in practice. I mean, these things just appear in his teachings and in his writing over and over and over and over. Apparently, it was really important for him to keep encouraging us to spend our energy, to spend it in the right place, right? And to not give up, and to have some courage about that. So, of course, the irony of making effort is that there isn't really a self making the effort. So as fast as Dogen is saying, extinguish those flames on your head, we also know there's no self with a head on fire that needs to be extinguished. So we get to carry both of these things as well. As soon as we have some idea about effort, then we're not making pure effort because it's based on some idea about self. And so we keep getting to, drop off these ideas about self, drop off body and mind, and at the same time make this energetic effort to extinguish the flames in our heads. So that's a really interesting intersection, right? That we get to sit in the middle of our practice. On the other hand, if we are wholeheartedly engaged in something, there is no separation between ourselves and that activity. So, there isn't an extra thing called effort. There is just activity happening. If I'm sitting Zazen, I'm not making an extra effort at my Zazen. There's simply Zazen happening because there's no me making an effort. There's no me sitting Zazen. So, we get to hold these things at the same time. So Uchiyama Roshi says, it is dangerous to say, I am working hard, because later on we may say, I am tired of it. I'll quit. Unconditionally, without expecting rewards, without gaining something, we just keep making an effort. This is true diligence as the practice of paramita. Right? So this is not about, I have an idea that I'm going to be hot stuff and make a lot of effort and impress people with my practice, or even impress just me with my practice, right? As soon as we say, I'm working hard, we have a problem. I think it's not unlike when we're in Zazen and we say, oh, I've really got it now. And the next moment, that goes away. Well, that's an idea about our Zazen, so we can't have an idea about that either. So Hojo-san says, since we are part of all dharmas, the foundation of our practice must be our awakening to the reality that we are indeed part of all dharmas or part of Buddha. In other words, it is not I who practice, but rather Buddha carries our Buddha's practice through me. In our Zazen practice and in our daily activity of Bodhisattva practice, it is not a matter of individual actions based on individual willpower and effort. It is rather the myriad dharmas, or all beings, that carry out practice through our individual bodies and minds. So I get to step aside. Something else is going on here, which is bigger than small self. So when I was training in Japan, one day, somehow, most of the other monks were away. Maybe they were down in town doing obon ceremonies or something. And the place was really just left to me and one of my friends. So, me and one or maybe other two people running the entire place for the day. And, there are a lot of jobs in a training temple. I don't know if you've ever been in a training temple, but there's just a lot of things that need to happen every day. Just basic functioning happens every single day. Some things are kind of ceremonial. We do liturgy 3 times a day. There are things we take care of related to altars and all of those things. Beating drums at certain times to tell everybody on the mountain what time it is. There's some things that we've inherited from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of practice. There are some things which are just about basic operations. So, my friend and I, in the middle of this day, kind of looked at each other and said, there are just a whole lot of things, aren't there, that need to be done every day just to live here. I mean, just to live here. There is just a lot that needs to receive our energy and our attention, right? Somebody has to cook meals. Somebody has to wash dishes, somebody has to prepare the bath, somebody has to carry out liturgy, deal with the visitors, answer the phone, open and close the big shutters, you know, and every morning there's big shutters on the hot door they have to open. Every evening we close them up again. I mean, there's just myriad things like this all the time. And it's not a case where we could say, well, there's only two of us, therefore we're going to skip some things. Not okay. There's actually a logbook every day where we have to record that we did 3 services, even if one person carried out the service, you know, for everybody. You know, we have to keep track of, we did all of these things. So we just looked at each other and went, there's just a lot that has to happen just to live here, let alone, you know, anything else that we want to take care of. Just the simple daily functioning takes a lot of our energy. So, you know, a day in a trailing temple is a pretty complex operation. You know, maybe it's a little bit less on days when people aren't so available. We might abbreviate some things. You know, if there's something else happening and our attention is taken up because 2 bus loads of tourists just pulled up outside expecting a sit-down lunch and a small Dharma talk, which happens, you know, maybe things get abbreviated, but still there's stuff that has to happen every day. So, you know, pretty much we're moving from 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. every single day, carrying out just basic functioning, right? In addition to whatever special events are happening or somebody's, you know, making a trip or whatever. So when we think about it, we're always really making a tremendous effort just to live. It doesn't matter what our circumstances are. We make a tremendous effort just to live. The body alone is doing all kinds of complex operations, right? I mean, you know, we know this here is a pretty complex operation. You know, change is happening all the time. There's really no getting away from expending energy anyway, just in our lives. So if we consider that, and we consider that there is no point in the day when we're not practicing, then there's an interesting intersection there about where our energy goes in our life and in our practice. So the question is, you know, where is that energy coming from? And where are we directing it? So there's expending energy that's about a conscious striving toward something. I'm making energy to get something, to achieve something. I'm trying to reach a goal. I'm trying to learn something, build something, you know, get from A to B, you know, this kind of goal-driven, objective-driven use of energy. There's nothing wrong with that. We need to do that. And in those circumstances, we expect to have a certain amount of control over what happens as a result of that vigorous exertion, right? There's a kind of an individual effort, or maybe it's the effort of a particular group of individuals, but it's something which is very much about form, you know, in small self or a group of small selves, which is expending energy to get something, to make something happen. There's also expending energy that's simply the universe doing what the universe does, which is not about, you know, my conscious decision to do something and to spend energy in a certain way. So I might plant seeds. I might say I'm growing a crop, but, you know, I don't really have anything to do with that. Seeds go in the ground. Am I growing that crop? No, I have nothing to do with it. Somehow seeds are doing what seeds do. And, you know, I might be watching it, I might be harvesting it at the end, but, you know, it's not me that's growing that crop. Causes and conditions are such that plants are growing every day, you know, day by day on their own. They're taking in energy from the sun and the rain and the soil and whatever, and expending that energy to grow. So interestingly, we can say that the seed's effort is to negate being a seed and to grow into a plant. And if you've ever heard Hojo-san give some talks, this should be a familiar image, although he does it slightly differently. He says a baby is just 100% a baby and has the energy to negate babyhood and become a boy or girl. Similarly, when we do something wholeheartedly with full attentiveness, that focused practice provides the energy that enables us to grow. In this sense, a baby is not simply a baby. Within the complete babyhood of being a baby, the baby negates babyhood itself. And although the baby is doing such a complicated thing as negating babyhood, the baby does not conceive this. The baby is just wholeheartedly being a baby. Our practice of Zazen is the same as this. So whether it's a puppy or a child or a seed or whatever, it's really interesting when we consider that the energy of that being in that Dharma position is to negate its Dharma position. So, you know, I'm 59 years old at this moment, and I'm working awfully hard to negate being 59 and become 60. So there's some energy happening. There's some transforming happening there, which is not about my conscious will to direct something. So it's really, interesting how we think about energy. So he says, this is what our Zazen is like. So now we get to consider the connection between effort and Zazen. So yes, we're sitting, we're not moving. We know that's not always easy. It looks like we're sitting there like a bunch of rocks, but we know there's some energy required. There's some energy being expended. It takes some effort to take this posture and keep our eyes open and breathe deeply and open the hand of thought, the only 4 things we do in our shikantaza. Those things seem simple and they require some effort, don't they? If we're paying attention, our posture feels natural, doesn't feel forced, doesn't feel like we're tying ourselves into pretzels. Not engaging in thought is not the same as actively pushing thought away, right? It's a different kind of energy. One of the first things we kind of discover in our Zazen, or at least a question that I frequently get when I teach Zazen, well, I don't understand how I can, how not thinking and non-thinking are, and thinking are all different, right? So it's not the energy of pushing our thoughts away. It's simply opening the hand and not engaging with them. So all of these things still take some energy, right? Otherwise, we're asleep. We all remember Uchiyama Roshi's diagram in Opening the Hand of Thought, right? We're either thinking or sleeping. Here's the Zazen line, right? Thinking, sleeping, thinking, sleeping. So some energy has to happen, otherwise we're asleep. If you sit sesshin with other people, there's a certain kind of energy that builds up or something in the room. It's a kind of a settled, focused energy. I'm not sure it's exactly the same when we sit a retreat individually at home and virtually. For me, I was alone in this room all weekend. It was me and Monju pretty much for the whole weekend. But there's some kind of settled, focused energy that happens there. So we've got to think. People might be sitting, not moving, looking at a wall for 50 minutes at a time for 14 periods a day, but that doesn't mean that there's no effort there, right? There's something interesting that happens. And yet, we're not straining to achieve something. It's not a striving, straining, pushing, forced, right, kind of thing. Certainly, we're not running away from our thoughts. We're not actively pushing them away or running away from them. We're just coming back to this moment over and over and over, letting go of whatever it is and coming back moment after moment after moment, over and over and over. So we do have to be a bit careful about where our energy is going in Zazen. What are we doing when we're sitting in Zazen? So when we talk about making effort, particularly in Zazen, we assume that we're supposed to be doing something. We're supposed to be getting, achieving, doing something, right? So yes, our Zazen is active. It's not a passive, sleeping, kind of motionless thing, but there's no me doing something. Zazen is not, Hoko's doing Zazen. There is Zazen happening. And it's a different kind of activity. So something is happening, energy is being expended, but I'm not driving that bus. If I am, I need to be careful about what's happening here. So Uchiyama Roshi says, it is not a matter of making a great effort not to be dragged around by desires. It is just waking up and returning to the reality of life that is essential. If we apply this to Zazen, it means that even if various thoughts do occur, they will all vanish when we wake up to Zazen. Right? So we can find, I think, other ways to practice with this even outside of being on a cushion or, being in the zendo or being in sesshin. We can, the way to work with impatience, for instance, is not to work extra hard to be patient, or to argue with impatience and have some aversion to impatience. It's to see how that impatience arises and let go of it. Look at the causes and conditions, and then can we let go of that? Can we direct that energy someplace else, right? As soon as we start struggling with our suffering, the suffering gets worse, right? I mean, there's the saying about, we can have pain and not have so much suffering. As soon as we're at war with it, where's our energy going? So one way to consider making effort is that starving a hindrance is a way of cultivating the opposite virtue. Right? Or allowing that opposite virtue to arise. So if I don't indulge my anger, maybe compassion arises because the anger gets out of the way. The compassion is already there, right? Naturally arises. So can we starve the hindrance in order to, let the virtue arise? It's an interesting use of energy. I'm not getting angry at my anger. I'm just not going to feed it and see what happens. So effort is particularly important for us as bodhisattvas because bodhisattvas don't practice for themselves, do they? or not entirely. We do practice for ourselves, but not entirely for ourselves. So whatever good we don't cultivate is good that we can't turn around and offer to other people. So it's important that we're doing the work of cultivating wholesomeness, because we're not just cultivating wholesomeness for ourselves. Whatever wholesomeness we don't cultivate, we can't turn around and offer into the world. So whatever hindrances we don't dissolve are going to keep us from liberating others from suffering. So we have our own hindrances that are uncomfortable and painful, and we don't like them very much. And not only that, it means we are less effective at turning around, and helping to free other people, helping other people to free themselves from suffering. So in the Tenzo Kyokan, Dogen says, future students must be able to see that side from this side, as well as this side from that side. So I'll just stop there to say, of course, that's the major theme of the Mahayana, isn't it? We've talked about this before, seeing one reality from two sides and expressing two sides in one action. So he's saying future students must be able to see that side from this side, as well as this side from that side. Practicing with intense effort, using all your ingenuity, you will be able to grasp genuine Zen that goes beyond the surface. To do otherwise will only result in being led about by variously tainted Zen that will leave you incapable of preparing meals skillfully for the community. So if we're somehow not fully wholeheartedly practicing, we will go off the rails to the point where, in this case, we can't prepare meals for the other people in the temple, or in the largest sense, we can't do our bodhisattva work, whatever that is for us in our Dharma position in the world. So, if we don't make an effort to stay on the path, it's not only ourselves that are affected, it inhibits our ability to help others and to do the bodhisattva work that we've agreed to do. So even if we try really hard and we really exert ourselves to help others, we're just not going to have the wisdom and the compassion that it takes to do that in a skillful way. So of course, we're not just practicing for, I want to feel better, right? We're also practicing because of that bodhisattva vow. So speaking of wisdom, Gate's statement again says, the faculty of effort is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we thoroughly attain many kinds of wisdom. So the actual kanji here don't say many kinds of wisdom. It actually says something like the virtue of wisdom. So in translating early Buddhist texts, that particular character got used sometimes for jnana, which is awareness or understanding in the earliest texts, as opposed to something like knowledge or intelligence, or something which is just here, right? Awareness and understanding being different. Sometimes this character was also used for prajna, or transcendental wisdom, the kind of wisdom to see the way Buddha saw, or to see what Buddha saw, the nature of reality. So in fact, working on the 4 exertions, as I mentioned a moment ago, or the 4 restraints, is sometimes called wise effort. We can't really do that effort without some discriminating wisdom, without some ability to see the way Buddha saw. So putting energy into cultivating and maintaining wholesomeness and preventing and diminishing unwholesomeness is a wise thing to do, and it also requires some wisdom in order to do it. So there's really no separating these two things. So we have to have the wisdom to discern what is a skillful use of effort and what is not a skillful use of effort. How much effort is enough, or too much, or not enough? To do all of that discernment, we need a broad view. We need to see with Buddha's eyes, right, in order to even start to make those discriminations. So making effort is itself practice. Effort is not a means to an end. We know Zazen is good for nothing. And also simply making that effort, is not separate from practice. That is itself practice. So we make effort because that's what we're doing right now. That's the activity that's happening right now, not because there's something outside of here and now that's going to appear. That we're going to magically acquire something that we don't already have. So making the effort is not on the way to something. It is the practice activity of bodhisattvas. So approached with wisdom and some kind of spirit of inquiry, that effort can tell us a lot about ourselves. If we look at where how that energy is arising and how we're using it, it can tell us something about ourselves and our practice and our sort of Dharma condition, right? Am I making an effort to shore up my sense of self, or to prove myself to others, or to me, or my teacher, or something? Am I striving for some kind of evidence that I'm doing this right? If I just work hard enough, I will get some validation that says, yes, my Zazen is good enough. or yes, my chanting is good enough, or yes, I really understand this piece of, text that I'm studying. I'm looking for some kind of validation. All that stuff just perpetuates our habituated thinking. All of that is effort that just sort of more deeply embeds our clinging, our craving, our grasping, right? Maybe I'm making less effort because I think that whatever is supposed to happen in my practice is really pretty much impossible. In other words, have I lost faith that this is a meaningful thing to do and that I can wake up the way Buddha did and see the way Buddha sees, right? Not I'm going to have some peak experience that I'm going to cling to and say, now I'm a great person. But if I truly think that this practice is impossible, that would be a good reason to sort of back away a little bit, right? So then, okay, what's going on with my faith? And that's not an approach we typically take to our practice, but faith is an important component. Am I making less effort because I really hate Zazen, but somebody said it was good for me? Well, if we approach our Zazen as therapy, that can happen. It's like, yeah, I really hate this, but my friend said this would be really good for me. Oh my. If so, then maybe some discernment is required, as well as some honesty with ourselves. Like, okay, what am I doing this for? And do I really have a clear understanding about Zazen? Of course, our teachers are going to point us toward things we don't see yet, but have I got something about self mixed up in there that I need to maybe look carefully at? Am I doing it to make my friend happy? Or am I doing it because I think I'm going to stop procrastinating or have better relationships, or all those things that we think are somehow an outcome of our Zazen practice, right? If we spend the whole Zazen period kind of daydreaming about where else we'd rather be, gritting our teeth, just kind of getting through it, then it's time to try to look carefully and gain some insight into what's going on with us. And we need to do that not only with wisdom, but with some compassion, right? This is not about, I'm going to beat myself up because I'm not feeling like doing Zazen today. But if we notice a drop in the energy, a drop in the effort, okay, why? Am I feeling a hindrance? Am I feeling a barrier? And often we know what that is, but we're not so anxious to name it to ourselves, right? So compassion and honesty can go together. It's like, if I'm feeling stuck in my practice and I'm just not making the effort that I kind of wish I could, what am I stumbling over? What's holding me back? Hojo-san always says our practice is not a torture. So it should not be that we're thinking we need to be samurai. We need to be tough people sitting, on the cushion. So yes, sesshin at Sanshin is intensive. Yes, we sit 14 periods a day. We don't do other activities. It's not an opportunity to prove that we're superhuman. And I think when I see first-timers come to sesshin at Sanshin and they say, I've been wanting to try out this schedule, I think there's an idea there. I'm wanting to test myself against the toughest possible practice. Why do I recognize that? I did it for years. Been there, done that. We really have some idea, but I'm going to make a ton of energy and effort, and I'm going to prove how tough I am. And, this is the toughest schedule going. And so I need to really pit myself against this thing and come out on top. Well, okay, that's the human condition. But when we recognize these things, coming up in ourselves, let's pay a little bit of attention to that. So, there are lots and lots of ways that making our effort can kind of go off the rails. We need to make sure that what we're doing is actually wise effort. Am I, expending effort in the right place and in the right amount? So just like, Buddha's life, we look at Buddha's life, he starts out in a really cushy environment. The next thing we see is he's doing this really ascetic practice. He's eating, 3 grains of rice a day or something, In the end, he decides, no, neither of those is it. It's the middle way. So we need to do kind of the same thing. Not, our life needs to be not too cushy, not too ascetic, something which is healthy and wholesome in the middle way. When it comes to our work, not being lazy, but also not being workaholics, right? Because if we're being workaholics, there's some ego tied up in there. Even if you think you're doing it to please other people, we can look carefully and say there's something else happening there. So, in our practice, not sitting intensively for several days or a week and then not getting on the cushion again for a month. someplace in the middle, right? Just daily, manageable practice. When people come to our introduction classes, you know, and I'm teaching Zazen, I always tell them, I would rather see you sitting 10 minutes a day every day than sitting an hour once a week. It's the regularity, getting on the cushion every day, making that measured, regular effort, as opposed to I'm going to scramble, you know, to work really hard for a week and then I don't get on the cushion again for a month. There needs to be some consistency, some equanimity there. So Buddha said in his last teaching that this kind of stopping and starting was as ineffective as rubbing two sticks together, trying to make a fire and then stopping when they're just getting barely warm. That's a pretty famous image, and you've probably heard that, right? So we can imagine we're furiously rubbing these sticks together. I'm furiously sitting, you know, 14 periods a day, and then I stop before anything really catches fire, right? I stop before I really can see something. So how can we make an effortless effort? You know, how can we strive without striving, as they say? Well, we can accept what's happening in this eternal now without struggling to avoid it, and also without falling in love with it and getting precious about it. We spend an awful lot of energy on rewriting our experience of this moment based on some expectation. It could be better, or it's the best of all possible worlds, or something. We also work pretty hard at trying to control what's happening, or to control our perception of what's happening and our story about what's happening, if we can't actually control what's going on in the universe or in the world. Some things we can control, some things we need to have some input into, and we need to set some direction. And, you know, in order to do that, first we have to see what's really going on, right? Frequently, we don't actually need to control what's happening. We can leave it alone, but we need to look carefully and see that. So with wisdom, we can redirect the effort that we make in some unskillful or unwholesome way and move that towards something else, right? Something more wholesome, something more skillful. What would you like to say about the faculty of effort? Before you speak up, I need to make sure I can hear you because we've got more than one computer in this room. Is that speaker all the way down?
Yes.
I'm afraid if I open this speaker, I'm going to get feedback. So I'm going to hope that doesn't happen.
It is off.
Oh, very good. Okay. Some brave soul with something to say, unmute yourself and let's try this out. Any questions, comments, reflections on effort today or anything else going on in your practice? Jeff, please.
Look, I had this question before your talk began, but your talk only made it a little bit more intense. And it was about the, I don't know if you can share this, but about if there was a special kind of effort that's required for you to make the transition from the sesshin to talking to us.
Yes, so that's a really interesting question. I have found that it's different for me when I am in a room full of people for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, and being silent. The energy is different, and then I find it more difficult to talk at the end of sesshin. And I have gotten so, especially with the longer sessions, I kind of warn people in the orientation before we get started, when this thing is over, be careful about re-entry. Sometimes we feel giddy, especially at the end of a longer session. It's like that last bell rings and you think, man, I climbed that mountain. You know, and there's this weird kind of giddiness that sets in. It was one of the first things I ever noticed about session, and I noticed I'm not alone. There's this giddiness that happens, and there's this explosion, or can be, this explosion of chatting, a lot of laughing. People kind of stumbling around. It's like I've been, you know, they opened the cage door and they let me out. And I tell people, be a little bit careful about that, you know, because not everybody is going to have that reaction. Some people are going to want to stay quiet for a while. And I've had both things happen to me, and I kind of think it just depends on where I am in my practice when I'm sitting. I used to notice even 24 hours later, walking down the street downtown, when I was still living in Minnesota, I'd walk down the street in downtown St. Paul, having come out of sesshin, And even a day later, I was still feeling very grounded and very quiet in a not about noise way, right? There was something about that energy which persisted. So there is a transition that happens. I found it to be less noticeable when I'm sitting here by myself, or even when it's just Hoshin and me sitting in the zendo together for 3 days or 5 days or whatever. There's still energy here, but it's different. It feels a little bit less difficult to kind of start up again. And I think it's because I have only one other human being with whom I'm interacting. I think if I had 12 people here and suddenly everybody was expressing, that would be more difficult. You know, when Hoshin arrived this morning, it's like I looked up and said, oh, that's Hoshin. It didn't throw me, you know, I said, well, this is nice, I'm happy to see him, but I didn't have a problem. You know, we had to have a few minor words to set up for today and how are we going to do it. And like that didn't feel painful to me, where sometimes coming out of an intensive sushi, it's really painful. And I usually tell people who fly, and there are a lot of you here who've come to Sanshin for something and have heard me say, on your way out of this building, if you're flying, please be really careful in the airport, because it will feel like a sensory assault. You've been in a zendo looking at a wall 14 hours a day, 3, 5, 7 days, and now you're going to go back into an environment where you cannot escape the big monitors blaring CNN at you, and the bright colors, and the announcements for flights, and the kiosks that want to sell you things. And I know for me, when I used to fly after Sesshin, I mean, it was really painful. So I tell people, go find the chapel. There's always a chapel in an airport or a meditation room. I said, go find it and hang out there. Don't miss your flight. You know, you can hear the announcements, and you know, you can come back out when you need to. But I found that I really need, as a transition out of some of those more intensive retreats, I need to stay quiet for a little while, because I'm like, my energy, and I'm not a woo-woo magic world person when it comes to the energy. It's just like there's something about that effort and something about that energy which I don't want to immediately kind of blow up, right? And I found that usually if there's somebody actually running the chapel or the meditation space, they're thrilled that I want to be there. They're thrilled that somebody wants to use it, right? So you don't have to do Zazen. I go, I read something, or I look for my papers, or whatever I need to do, right? But there is something about being mindful about the energy coming out of an intensive retreat that I think is really important. So it's a really interesting question, and I'm glad you brought it up. Do you want to follow up on that at all, or maybe anybody else about that or something else?
Well, I'm always impressed by your talks, and this was a good example of them, where you started with an organized set of ideas, then you took us on these trips through, you know, these various components of them, and then by the end you came back and to those original ideas and sort of brought them together again and summarized them. So when I witnessed that kind of organization, and then I think about, this goes back to my original question, you came from this 3 days of what I think was a different kind of energy to sit and look at the wall, and then transition into this other one.
Yeah.
I don't know if you reached back to your state before the sesshin and grabbed that and all the preparation and re-enter there, or if you transitioned from the consciousness of the sesshin into it. I'm just...
Yeah, that's really interesting. So now that you say that, so Hoshin and I sort of conceived of these weekend at-home retreats and put them on the calendar and started doing them. And then we said, well, you know, there's no reason why we can't still do the regular Sunday practice. And it's kind of not possible when we're doing these things in person, as Hojo-san originally conceived Sesshin, you know, in the style of our family. So this is a bit of a different animal. So in addition to just schedule-wise, it's kind of not possible to put Sunday practice, kind of drop it down in the midst of those kind of Sesshin. I'm imagining, as you were saying that, I'm imagining coming out of that kind of Sesshin and having to give a talk. I'm not sure I could do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. People who do Sesshin in other places and in other styles will know frequently there's a Dharma talk every day of Sesshin. And I think now the daily schedule in those cases is more like an average day in a temple, in that there's work period, there's chanting at meals, there's, break time, which we don't do here. We only do zazen, eating, meals, and sleeping. Those are the only three things we do. So something like Genzo-e or the Precepts Retreat is different. It's kind of based on a Sesshin-like model, but there's talks, during the day. So we don't call it Sesshin, it's a retreat. And it's a different kind of a thing. There's long break times and it's talky time in between, and so it's a kind of a different energy. So I'm imagining now how that would be had I really sat these 3 days with a dozen other people and we'd been really deeply silent together for all that time. And then somehow at the end of that, I was supposed to give a talk. I would find that painful. I mean, to be honest, I would find that kind of painful. I prepped this talk before the session. So, usually I would take a whole week to write I write like a page a day, and I take a whole week, and I find that my understanding of the topic develops over the course of that time. And it's not only about time management, it's about my own kind of discernment about the topic. This one I did before we sat down, and I didn't look at it again. And I didn't think about it until today. And so I think I was only able to do that because I was here by myself for those 3 days, had prepped the talk ahead of time, and the energy is different. I think if there had been a dozen people here, that would have been hard. I think I wouldn't have wanted to do it. Partly I wouldn't have wanted to do it because I would have found it painful, and partly I would think it's a shock to everyone who's been sitting. It's like suddenly you're confronted with, because I don't talk about lightweight stuff. You guys know. My talks are pretty dense. This is what I hear from people anyway. So to be suddenly have that thrown at you when you've been sitting 14 periods a day, I think would be a painful kind of energy. But I don't know. That's just my perception. So I didn't mean to hog the floor there. But Jeff is raising something interesting I hadn't considered, so I appreciate that. What would you, Jeff, or others like to say about effort, energy, zeal, vigorous effort? Any such thing related? Yogan's got his camera on. Are you about to favor us with some pearls of wisdom? Carla's waiting.
I just woke up, so hello, everybody.
Good morning. Okay. Other questions, comments, please. Claire, go ahead.
I just want to ask a question about, I find for myself in my practice that I so appreciate your practice. I think it's outstanding. And I find for myself, what I've realized over the last 3 days is my question is, do you have any advice, maybe a reading or just from your heart, how to deal with managing pain while you're sitting? And I have physical pain on my back. It's probably just mild arthritis, but I find it's easier if I stretch or if I move. So the first question is, how do you deal with physical pain when you're sitting? And then the second question is, what I've noticed over the last 3 days is when I have an emotional pain or some kind of intellectual pain, I tend to kind of protect myself by backing off a little bit. And so what would you do in a case like this?
Oh, well, those are classic questions, aren't they? Everybody listening goes, yep, been there. Yep, I have the same question. We're all working with that at some level. Well, I'll tell you right now, my knees are aching because I've been sitting for all weekend, so I can appreciate that too. All right. So pain in the body. Well, first we need to determine that we're not actually injuring ourselves by sitting. This, as Hojo-san always says, our practice is not a torture. So if I'm concerned that I'm going to blow out one of my knees because of the way I'm sitting, then I need to do something. This is not about gritting our teeth and toughing it out. So sometimes we know if we respond to every twitch and tingle, that's just getting distracted. Every little whatever. There are some things that we don't need to control and we don't need to change, and they're going to pass. And if we pay a little bit of attention, we say, well, that's not actually pain, it's a stretching, it's a burning, it's a something. Because so often we feel some sensation, we know from previous talks, right? Some sensation comes in and immediately it's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and we're off to the races. We write a story. We feel some sensation which may be unfamiliar or slightly unpleasant. We go, pain, bad, gotta move, and we're consumed by, our whole consciousness is consumed by, this pain in my knee. So as long as we know sitting through that pain is not about ego, and I'm not creating an injury for myself. Now I can say, what is the nature of that kind of sensation? Well, in my case, when I'm feeling this, it's a stretching, this angle is probably not quite right for me the way I'm sitting right now. And there's a stretch here. I could label it pain, but I could also say, well, maybe it isn't. Maybe I need to move. If I'm really going to hurt myself, I need to not be stuck with this idea that I must absolutely be stock still. Maybe I need to move, but I need to not grab that pain and write a story about it such that I'm now at war with it. This pain is bad. I need to do everything I can do to get rid of this pain because this pain is a terrible thing. It reminds me of some other bad thing, or it means I'm not as good as Hoshin because he's sitting there without pain, or, right? I mean, we get on the train and we ride it out of town. So we need to not argue with this pain. If we need to take care of it, we need to take care of it. We need to see ourselves clearly. We need to understand the pain clearly. Maybe it's time for a different cushion. It's time to move to a chair. I mean, if you're sitting with me, you guys get to watch me all weekend. You see I move from chair to bench to cushion because I'm taking care of my body. We need to take care of the body because the body is the ground of our practice. We don't have anything else to use. We don't have anywhere else to go. So if we're injuring this in the service of some idea, not a good plan, not a good use of energy. When it comes to things like emotional pain, in some ways we can approach it similarly. We have some unpleasant emotion, something that makes us feel, I don't know, it's painful, and we go, bad pain, got to get rid of it. This is terrible. It consumes my whole life. It consumes my consciousness. Right? So again, what's actually happening there? Some sensation is happening. So like, what's actually going on there? Is it something I really need to do something about? Maybe it is. I'm really, having a mental health crisis, or I'm in a really toxic situation, or there's, I need to take care of myself. And maybe it's that if I look carefully, I say, oh, I see what's happening here. I'm feeling angry about this thing. This has actually happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to all of you. I'm feeling angry about this thing. Oh, it's because I'm clinging to this idea. I had this expectation that I was supposed to get recognized for this thing, and I didn't. And when you see that, it's like the legs go up from when you go, oh, I can let go of that. Oh, look, silly me. I can let go of it. I do that with compassion, right? It's like, oh, there's, that's built on sand. The sand is washing away. So in some cases, that dissolves with a little bit of, wisdom and compassion. It dissolves. I'm not saying we should ignore trauma. If we need to get help, we should absolutely get help. Yeah. But again, we need to not be at war with this stuff. I'm feeling angry, and now I'm angry at myself for feeling angry. I'm feeling impatient, and I'm impatient with myself for feeling impatient. It's like we can see how the suffering just kind of spirals, right? So it's like, okay, what's actually happening? Do I need to cling to that? Do I need to have aversion for that? Right? So there's a middle ground where we need to get help and get care, we do it. If it's something that we can see is based on my idea and I can let go of it, good. There's a middle ground there which is wholesome and healthy. And it's precisely these kinds of things that make Sangha important. We need to have our practice reflected back to us. We need to have sources of inspiration and guidance and models we can look to, and just the encouragement of knowing other people are doing this crazy practice and they're probably facing the same kind of hindrances that I am. And that can be a bit difficult in a world where the rest of the world isn't on this path. Sad to say, there are lots of paths, but the rest of the world, probably, if we go to the grocery store, most people don't know, kind of what our practice is like. So to have others around us that can give us advice and encouragement, I think, is helpful. Is that enough for now, Claire? Do you have things you want to follow up on?
That's extremely helpful. So like if you're going down the drain, just go down the drain completely with compassion and tolerance and just keep going. That's
yeah. So if you can, you wholeheartedly enter into whatever is going on. So yeah. Job one is we have to accept that there is suffering. Accepting that there is suffering is difficult. That's why there is the first noble truth. We don't want to accept that there is suffering, and we don't want to think that suffering is normal. We think that a perfect happy life of contentment means that there is absolutely no suffering. Well, Buddha said, sorry, folks, in this human form, there will be suffering. Job one is we accept there is suffering. That doesn't mean that we don't do something about the suffering, but we can't do anything about it if we refuse to accept that there is suffering. So once again, my old refrain, compassion is not condoning, acceptance is not approval. So we can say that there is suffering. That doesn't, I have pain in my knee. I'm suffering from pain in my knee. That doesn't mean maybe I don't want to move or do something about that, right? So yes, we wholeheartedly enter into and accept whatever is going on. That doesn't mean we're doormats to it. But we can't do anything about it unless we see it clearly, right? We can't see what Buddha saw unless we get right in the middle of it. That takes courage. That takes diligence and persistence. And again, it's why Sangha is so important. This is not easy work, boys and girls. We need each other, even if it's virtually, right? We really need each other to keep going. So energy gives us the persistence to stay on the path. But I think part of that comes from being part of a community. And let me say, you're coming to us from Newcastle on Tyne in England, correct? So
Correct.
what time is it there for you?
Right now, I think it's 4:20 in the afternoon. So
you've had almost a whole day. Very good.
Yeah.
What would others like to say about energy, effort, zeal, wholeheartedness? Jessica, Jikan, please.
Hi. I'm excited that this is the first time that I've ever, away from home, done a solitary retreat, and I decided to join in with you all through this opportunity. I have to say I love that this talk was centered on effort because I experienced it in two ways. First, I was not at all intimidated by the quiet because being here in this space away from home, it was very much humming and buzzing with the sounds, of the pipes, the refrigerator running, the heat, the nature outside, the discursive mind. So it felt, I'm not nervous about going back into the stream, so to speak. But I have to say, I very much came face to face with the hindrance of fatigue and tiredness. And I have to say, that's a big one for me. Having grown up with a very regimented and disciplined just upbringing, but it feels like a luxury to be able to take a nap, to be able to rest, and the rigor of 14 hours of sitting and what I don't think is adequate sleep accounted for, gave me the space to kind of explore that. I think that was helpful, but it was also very much a challenge. It allowed me to connect with my experience of just trusting my own intuition. What is it that my body needs? So I love that Claire's question about pain arose because the pain of exhaustion is part of it. But I think also the delusion of or the escape from discomfort through sleep is also present. So what do you have for that? What do you have?
Well, it's really interesting, the escape through sleep.
Yes.
So reminds me of my time in training temples, where there was often a little bit of downtime between lunch and the work period of the afternoon. And I remember one case where it was a kind of a special practice event, and I was in a particular temple in Japan for this thing. And for many of us, we hadn't spent a lot of time in training temples, and it was kind of painful to be there. We were all confronting our neuroses. Someday I will tell you about all the neuroses that came up in these. It was really kind of interesting. But one of the things we very quickly noticed was that in that 45 minutes or something of downtime between lunch and the work period, you could have heard a pin drop. Everybody was asleep. And of course, we all kind of thought, well, it's because we're exhausted. We're working hard. And one smart person amongst us said, no, we all don't want to be here. We're all going to sleep so we can be somewhere other than here. And I went, that's so right. So sometimes we can find in even just our daily Zazen, but certainly in retreats, that fatigue is sometimes physical fatigue. Sometimes it is, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in the room with what I can't distract myself from anymore, because so much of our day is spent distracting ourselves from parts of ourselves we don't like so much. Suddenly, all I have is a wall, and I can't get away from myself. And so what does my body do out of compassion? It goes to sleep, because I don't want to think about face, be in the middle of all of this. So again, it takes some courage to sit through that. It is interesting, the way this schedule is an improvement over what it could be, because the original form of this thing, you may have read, is that I think the monks got 2 hours of sleep, and I think they had to sleep sitting up on their cushions, if I remember correctly. So along came one of our ancestors, I don't remember, I think it was Uchiyama Roshi, said, oh, no. Human body needs some sleep. We're going to get 6 hours of sleep. So it's like, oh boy, that feels like a party. I'll tell you, if you commute, you get less. So when people come to Sesshin here, I warn them, you will get 6 hours a night maximum. Don't expect to ever feel well rested. I mean, other than the energy that's coming up from your Zazen, because, if you're commuting, you will get 5 maybe. And if you're me, who's also trying to run a Dharma center at the same time, you'll get 3 if you're lucky. So yeah, we all get to practice with that fatigue element. And then how do we direct our energy, toward dealing with the fatigue? Other things people would like to say, ask, reflect on, related to the faculty of energy. We had enough for today? All right. Oh, please, Zinky, good to see you.
Hi, thank you. It's good to see you. I would recently there's a lot of effort, it seems, in maybe American Zen towards social issues, suffering occurring in this social realm. That's real suffering, but and I'm interested in just your response or your thoughts about that.
Oh my goodness, how long have you got?
You can contact me after if you like.
Well, I was going to say, actually, this is a live controversy in our Sangha right now. How engaged and in what ways, how engaged do we become in the community, and in what ways do we do that? I could give another whole Dharma talk on that, and instead I'm going to invite you to have a look at the part of our website about work, Zazen Work and Study. Look at the work piece, because there are some themes there and some directions there that will tell you something about Sanshin's current approach to that question. And I have to say that's under discussion. I'm just going to say there's still a lot of conversation happening about what that needs to look like. And the reason for that is that you're raising a really important, good, relevant question to which there is no easy answer, at least in our Dharma family. If you look at the teachings of our immediate ancestors, and then you look at the pressures that we as individual humans may feel, and as bodhisattvas to be engaged in the world, there's some things there we have to hold. We have to hold two things, and I don't think any of us is too sure exactly how to do that. So we can be in touch outside of this if you want to be, but I'm going to say, start there, and that'll give you some feeling for the parameters of that conversation within the Sanshin world at this moment. Okay, very good. All right, I think it's probably time for us to wrap up, to do our closing chants, and to move along. I've been in this room for 3 days. So maybe it's time unless anybody's got any last things they want to say, ask, bring up. Okay. So next week is a normal week. We'll do this all again. Until then, please stay safe out there. Thanks for your practice. We'll do our closing chant for now.